All right, thank you so much for joining us today, for those in person or virtually. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director at the Office of National Fellowships. And so we're going to be talking about the Fulbright U.S. Student Program today, but we're going to be talking both about the academic awards and the English teaching assistantships. There's also the Creative Arts Fulbrights, so we're going to touch on all of that. And then we have Beatrice Dane, one of our current Fulbrighters in the United Kingdom. They're going to be joining us to share a little bit about their experience in applying for Fulbright and their current time as a Fulbrighter. So this is going to be a very quick introduction and a lot of information. So I don't expect you to remember everything today, but hopefully this will answer some of your questions and then reach out to either myself or Dr. McCall, who's also on the presentation today. He works up in the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards, but altogether, we and a couple other colleagues all work on this award. So make sure that you reach out to us and we can set up a one-on-one appointment to talk about your interests and the specific Fulbright Fellowship that you would like to apply for. If I could get this to work, that would be fantastic, but well, let's just see if we'll do it the old way. So like I said, we're going to be talking about both the English teaching assistantship and the academic awards, but we're also going to talk about the application components. Fulbright it's a very extensive application, not just in the essays that you need to write, but in the short responses you need to write, making sure that you're gathering the letters of recommendation, letters of affiliation. And so we're here to obviously help you in drafting those essays, but also in managing all of those other components. We're also going to be talking about what helps your application stand out, both for the national review and at the international level, how our offices can help. And then, like I said, we have our guest speaker, and we're going to have time for questions at the end. I'm not going to read all of this to you. If you're interested in the history of Fulbright and the origins of this fellowship, please go in and read about it. I do think it's relevant because Fulbright was founded after World War II. And its mission then is the same as the mission it has now, and that is to foster mutual peace and understanding between the United States and other countries through the means of your academic study, your research projects, teaching English and culture, and working with these partner teachers. Regardless of what you're doing or what your Fulbright becomes, we want to make sure that in as many ways as possible, we're really emphasizing the cultural exchange that is going to happen when you're in this specific country doing this specific project. So yeah, Fulbright, it's sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. I already kind of talked about this. It's a fully funded opportunity. They're going to pay for your airfare, your cost of living. You do have a stipend while you're in country, depending on the nature of your project. Like I said, if it is one of those like creative arts projects, they do have funding to support you in that way. So no two Fulbright is worth the same. For like an ETA in Colombia is going to be completely different than a graduate degree in the United Kingdom, but they make sure that they take care of you while you're in country and during this project. To be eligible, you do need to be a U.S. citizen, and you do need to have your bachelor's degree before you would start the grant. So if you're a graduate student, absolutely fine, but the earliest you can apply to is the summer before your final year. So if you're a rising senior, we'll talk a little bit more about the timeline later, but you essentially apply a year ahead of when you would start. So if you're applying, say, fall of your senior year and you don't graduate until the summer, that should be fine because most Fulbrights don't begin until August, and some don't begin until January or February, just depending on the country. So you want to make sure that you have that degree before you would apply. And for example, if you're a master's student, you probably want to apply at the end of your final year, or if you're in your PhD, right before you start your dissertation phase. The countries are going to have varying requirements, but for some countries, I think it's about like a 50-50 split that you'll see, but some countries require no experience in the language. Like for the ETAs, for example, many countries in Eastern Europe and Africa and Southeast Asia don't require any background in the knowledge because they want native English speakers. If you have proficiency in the language or you have an interest in learning the language, like absolutely you should share that in your application. But for, say, for countries anywhere from Mexico to Argentina, some countries in Western Europe, and others, of course, like it's usually intermediate, but it can be anywhere from beginner to advanced proficiency in the language. That is a caveat there is that dependent on the nature of your project, for example, if the nature of your research really necessitates advanced proficiency in the language that you don't quite have, we can talk about that, but we need to make sure that either you're going to continue to study the language before you go, or you have access to translators and resources in country. And the last caveat is something that we can talk about one-on-one. I know that good health is pretty subjective and it varies by country, but again, that's something that we can talk about one-on-one. So I already kind of talked about this. Fulbright's going to cover all of your travel expenses, your health insurance. You do get a monthly stipend. You're not going to be living lavishly, but you're not going to be going without. Fulbright does exist in over 160 different countries, but every country is going to have different types of Fulbrights and slightly different requirements. They're also going to have different numbers of Fulbright. So you can find some countries that will offer 2 academic awards and 2 English teaching assistantships. And then you can look at Spain and it's like, we have 185 English teaching assistants. So it varies greatly. But typically the average Fulbright is going to be anywhere from 8 to 10 months, but there are some awards that last a full year. And I think South Korea has the longest ETA experience at 13 months. But regardless of which application you're applying for, whether it's the academic or the English teaching assistantship, what we need to do with your application, like I already said, is find all of those ways to make your application inseparable from the country that you're applying to. Like if we can look in your application in your essays and I can control F, whichever country you're applying to, and replace it with another country and your application does not change, that's not a strong or compelling application. And so I want to make sure that I mention that at the beginning of the application process, I don't need you to have all of those intimate reasons on why you need to be here. If it just begins with a feeling, that's absolutely fine, because part of why we start this application process so early is that we encourage our students to do their own research about where they're applying to. If they need to read any relevant literature about the populations they may be working with, or to look into the educational system in that country, like that's why we get started early, because we don't really need to get started on the writing process until the summer. But the more legwork that you can do up front to know what you're getting yourself into, I think it'll make that process so much easier. For the academic awards, the vast majority, like 98% of them, are going to be in a single country, but there are some really unique awards that do allow you to travel to multiple countries or have a little bit more flexibility with your project in that way, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be in one specific country. And then with the English teaching assistantships, very rarely are they going to ask that you lead a classroom. Like the point is that you're going to be working with a partner teacher and you're there as that cultural liaison. Something that we'll talk about in a little bit is how to share your pedagogical methods in the classroom, because while they're looking for cultural ambassadors, every applicant is going to define American culture differently. And they look for that diversity. They want to see not just how are you going to help them in their language learning, but what are you going to share with your students to help them grow personally, or just help them become, more, I guess, worldly, for lack of a better word. But yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more. Just to quickly highlight a couple students that we've worked with in the past and why they applied to the specific countries that they did and how they navigated it. I worked with Brian some years ago, and a lot of his experience, like he had extensive experience in working at summer camps, working with students whose first language was not English, working with students with disabilities. And all of that experience over the course of his undergraduate career really influenced his ideas for what he wanted to use in the classroom, very creative methods. And he looked at Kenya specifically because in doing his research, like I mentioned, he was looking at Kenya's educational system. And his background, like his interest in education and his passions for education really centered around access and making sure that students had access to the resources that they needed and the support that they needed. And when he was studying Kenya's educational system to really progress through their system and ultimately get to college, a major crux of that was that you needed to be proficient in English. And so he thought he had the methods, he had the ideas, he had the tools to really help his students learn. Without getting too much in the minutia of how he did that, he talked about his in-classroom methods, but then part of his application was also an after-school program through a supplementary project, which is for some ETAs, a required component. So it's not just what are you doing in the classroom, it's what are you doing in the community to further learn about the people, the culture, the place. And he talked about, he called it chai chats. And so he talked about an after-school program where students could come and get the language in a more colloquial manner and be more conversational and to be able to talk about other things of their interest. And that was also open not just to his students, but for his community members to join as well. The next student, Eli, was an academic recipient to the Philippines. And so I think he's a great example of taking what you're doing at Florida State and the things that you're interested in here, the research that you're doing here, and being able to adapt and mold that to the destination that you're wanting to apply to. So when we started working on this application, like Eli knew he wanted to apply to the Philippines because of research that had been done regarding coral reef restoration. And so he had a lot of ideas and experience in 3D modeling and 3D printing and obviously I'm not going to describe this as well as he could, and how to use those models to help restore coral reefs. And initially, he had a very good idea for his methods and his ideas and how this works, and it has proven to work. But when he reached out to a specific research lab in the Philippines, they expressed excitement, like, yeah, we would love to work with you, but we already have this established research project that has like over 10 years of data, and we're looking to grow it, and we think you would be a really great addition to this project. So what started as his idea ultimately became like an amalgamation of what the research lab was doing, what his ideas were, and then he was able to work with that research lab and craft an application that was very knowledgeable of what was going on in country and how he fit into that picture. And so the same could be, so when you're developing your project, it doesn't have to entirely be your idea. If you're reaching out to universities or other institutes in countries or relevant nonprofits or libraries, whatever it may be, that goes into the letter of affiliation that I mentioned previously, where different entities in country will express excitement for your Fulbright project or how they would support you. Again, it goes back to why we're getting started early, because developing those relationships takes time. You can use your faculty, use the resources you have at Florida State, but in some cases, like Eli, he just reached out to these institutes on his own and was just like, hey, I really like the work that you're doing. This is the research that I'm doing. Could we find time to set up a Zoom call? And it took a couple months, but he was able to establish that relationship and not just get a letter of support from the research institute he reached out to, but one of the faculty members there actually reached out to a colleague in a different part of the, or on a different island that was also doing this project, and talked about being able to collaborate. So long story short, this is what we're here to help you with, help you establish those connections, reach out to those entities, and be able to draft this research project and these research essays. And so now to kind of go through just the application and what is really asked of you. Obviously, you need to complete the online application, but the reason that's on there is because it's a very deconstructed resume. It takes a lot of time to fill out, and it's not something you want to wait until like the week before the deadline to really start filling out. But also, so much emphasis is placed on the statement of grant purpose and the personal statement that sometimes what gets overshadowed are the 3 short responses that are in the online application. And so I do recommend starting with the statement of grant purpose and personal statement. And then once we get about a month or so out from the deadline, then we can start looking at the short responses, which ask you, why are you applying to this country? What are you going to do in the community to learn and engage with the culture? And what are you doing after Fulbright? Now, sometimes you're going to answer those 3 questions in some ways in your essay, but we want to make sure that we diversify what you say in the short responses and in the essay so we make the most of the space that you have. Now, if you're applying for the study research grants, you have, so every application is going to have a one-page personal statement, but the academic grants are going to have a two-page statement of grant purpose. The ETAs are only going to have one page. So these are challenging in different ways. And what's really challenging about the English teaching assistantship is that you have one page to not just establish why you're applying to this country, but to discuss your pedagogical methods. And if the country that you're applying to asks for a supplemental project, you need to make sure that you allot space to discuss what you're doing and why you're doing it. Obviously, that's a lot of information to fit into one page, but we have many examples of students have done that successfully. And so we have sample essays and other examples that we can share with you that also make sure that we're getting your best ideas whittled down to like their most core components. Now in the statement of grant purpose, that 2 pages is obviously to, again, establish why you're applying to this country, to detail the urgency of your project or the relevancy of your project, if that's research or if it's a graduate program, say like a one-year master's. We need to talk about the relevancy of that degree. We need to talk about again, if you're applying to an academic program, a degree program, we need to talk about the relevant coursework or thesis component or the faculty that you could work with or the city that you're in or the university. Why does it have to be not just in this country, but at this specific institution? Whereas if you're applying to just a research opportunity, again, we need to detail the project, what you're doing, who you're collaborating with, and also be able to tie in that relevancy, maybe that future direction, or perhaps the cultural engagement ideas that you have, maybe not related exclusively to your research, but what else you might be doing in that community. So that 2 pages goes by very quickly. The language evaluation, if it's required for your country, we can find faculty at Florida State that can evaluate you on your speaking, your reading, and your writing, and make sure that they list you at the proficiency needed. If it is a specific language that isn't taught at Florida State, that's something we can work with. We can find someone that can evaluate your language proficiency. And now you do also have 3 letters of recommendation that you need to submit. And so for the academic grants, faculty often look best, but you want to make sure that you have people that can speak to not just your academic abilities, your research capabilities, your ability to engage across culture, to be that ambassador. And we're thinking letters in the traditional sense, because for the English teaching assistantship, they're reference forms. So it's about 5 questions that they're going to answer. And we have that sample document, we can share that with you, but it's not a letter in the traditional sense. But obviously you're gonna want people who can speak to, again, your cultural ambassadorial abilities, your ability in the classroom, your ability to work with others, engage across difference, all of that. The affiliation letters, you can submit up to 3. They're not required for the English teaching assistantship, but for the academic grants, what this does is it builds the feasibility of your project. And that feasibility is like, if there's one word that you remember from this presentation, it's feasibility, because Fulbright wants to know that if we support you and endorse you for this project and we drop you in this country or in this new city, that we want to know you have the support to do exactly what you say you're going to do. And so oftentimes the requirement for the affiliation letter is that you work or you collaborate with an academic institution or some faculty member or someone in country that can advise you on your project. Now, we have plenty of examples of students in the past that have checked that box, but then dependent on their project, it's, for example, we've had students that have gotten letters of affiliation from specific libraries in specific cities that have the text that they need or the resources that they need. We have had students that have collaborated with nonprofits that work with the specific populations that they're wanting to work with. And so then if you, again, start early enough, you can look at letters of affiliation and like I said, submit up to 3, and all 3 could provide a different angle for how you're going to be supported when you're in country to make sure that your project not only gets done, but gets done in the 8 months that you have. And so again, it goes back to feasibility. And then of course, You need your transcripts. Make sure you have your passport, which you can apply for at Florida State over through international programs in the stadium if you don't have it. And then that last little bit is, so you need to submit a portfolio if you're applying for a project or a research idea in the creative arts. So whether it's in music, whether it's in painting, whether it's in, it doesn't matter what it is, but they'll tell you on the website exactly what you need to submit. Either it's a very specific recording or a video of certain length. You need to submit some of the examples of your writing or of your poetry, or you need to submit, whatever it may be. Like I said, they'll tell you. Okay, moving right along. So I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. So what helps your application stand out? I've already said a commitment to Fulbright's mission. And so they want to see applications that are furthering that peace and understanding between countries. They want to make sure that this application is unique to the area that you're applying to, which can be it's challenging depending on the application you apply to in different ways. But like I said, for the academic grants, it's not just why you need to apply to this country, but if you're applying for one of the degree programs, it's why do you need to apply to this specific university in the United Kingdom, for example, and not any other? What are those resources? Who are those faculty? Like, what do they have? What is it about their program that stands out? And whereas for the English teaching assistantship, it takes into account the populations that you could work with, because certain ETAs you'll be working with kids, some you may be working with adults, and literally anywhere in between university students, secondary students. And so we want to see what do you bring to the table to help that student population specifically? To kind of give you an example of that, worked with a student a couple of years ago that applied to Argentina specifically because they were going to be working with high school students. And they looked at retention rates for universities in Argentina and saw those retention numbers were very low. And so upon doing more research, their expertise, they had a lot of mentorship experience, they had a lot of service experience, and they had a lot of career development experience. And so they thought that they didn't just have the ability to help them learn English, but they had the ability to help them develop their resumes, develop their professionalism. So whether they go to college or not, they're prepared for what comes after high school. But anyways, they want to see limited in-country experience. Really what that means is they don't want to see someone that has been living in the country for the past year to 2 years or longer, and then they're applying to a Fulbright to stay in country for even longer. For some, I've worked with students that have dual citizenship, and in some cases that's allowed. I have some students that were born in certain countries, got their US citizenship, but they want to go back to that country, but they don't have. Anyways, if you're concerned about that, we can talk about it, but rarely has that been an issue for a student that I've worked with. The language proficiency, of course, you need to meet what the country asks or be able to show that you will have that proficiency before you get to the country. Again, going back to feasibility, make sure you have the resources available and translators if you need that for your project. And again, I know I've mentioned this a couple times, but it is so important that your project is specific to where you're applying. It takes time to really develop those reasons. It's always going to be multifaceted when done very well. And so we want to make sure that we draw those reasons to the surface in your application. I've already talked about feasibility. And the last little bit is just as we're working on your application, we want it to be authentic, we want it to be relevant, and we want to find those ways for it to be compelling, not just in an academic sense, but the personal statement is really, it's such an amazing opportunity to be able to share your story and be able to connect it to why you're studying the topics that you are, why you're so passionate about these things, or why you're so interested in the place that you need to go. And when done well, those essays really resonate with those reviewers and they really can stand out. In terms of the process, so Fulbright is one of the longest, well, from the time that you apply to the time that you would actually go, it's going to be about 1.5 years in many cases. And so that's pretty unique for a lot of the awards that we work with. So for example, June 1st, that is going to be our first deadline for what is called our pre-application. What that means, and no one is going to see this but myself or Dr. McCall or the advisor that you're working with, but what that means is we want first full drafts of both essays. We want, at the very least, a soft confirmation from your letters of or your recommendation letter writers, and ideally, not required, but ideally that you have made contact with a possible affiliate in country, or you have ideas for who you're going to reach out to. And the reason why we set that deadline at June 1st is because it's going to take months to develop your essays, develop your project, and really hammer out all of those details. But also, especially after the last few years, I'm going to need to take a week or two off this summer just to literally veg out. You're going to need to take a week or two off to literally veg out. And I encourage you to do that. And so to make sure that we can accommodate those weekly meetings. And also, you know, I've had students that are like, hey, I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks and I won't be in contact. That is absolutely fine because we start early enough, we can accommodate that to make sure that you're still able to have a restful summer, but still able to do what you need to do for this application. So June 1st deadline is going to segue into our campus deadline, which for English teaching assistantships is going to be August 24th. The 25th is going to be for, and that is for full and complete applications. So we want full essays. We want your short responses in your application to be done. We want your letters of recommendation submitted. We want your affiliation letters submitted. And the reason for, and we understand there are some circumstances where a component may be missing. Work with your advisor and talk to them about that. But the reason why we want full and complete applications is because you submit your application exactly like you would on the day of the national deadline. We're able to unsubmit if there's an error, so it's not as stressful as it sounds. But you submit your application so we can download that PDF and share it with our faculty committee. So you're on the day that you submit, you're also going to be signing up for an interview in mid-September. And that is with an eclectic group of faculty from Florida State, former Fulbrighters, representatives from departments where we get a lot of Fulbright applicants, and they're going to read your application, review your materials, and then we schedule about a 30-minute interview where the whole purpose of that interview is to get you feedback, to make small improvements to your application, but also the benefit of applying through Florida State's process is that one of those faculty members will write what is called a CCE form, or a campus committee evaluation form. And it's a 1 to 2 page document where they're able to add more nuance to just who you are as a person, the relevancy of your research or of your project, and why it's so important for you to have this opportunity. And when done well, and I've seen many examples from our current semifinalists for Fulbright, is that letter can just add so much more depth than you're able to provide on your own because of the space limitations. And so I think that document can really add a lot of compelling aspects to not just who you are, but why it's so important for you to do this opportunity. So after the interview, you get feedback. You're able to take 1 to 2 weeks, depending on when your interview is, to make those edits, make those changes, and then you resubmit your application. Fulbright hasn't released the specific deadline yet, but we are hopeful that all applications will be in by October 3rd, because we need to attach that CCE form to every applicant, and that obviously takes time. Once you submit for the national deadline, then that just begins the waiting process. It's gonna take a while, but it's November, December, they have the review committees, and usually around January is when you're notified if you're a semifinalist. So you're either going to be told, congratulations, keep waiting, or unfortunately, try again next year. The semifinalist status can be, you just are a semifinalist until you find out if you receive it. There's absolutely nothing else that you do. You just sit and wait for like 2 to 3 more months. Or you're notified that you're a semifinalist, and here is your interview time. And that's not for every country, but some countries do hold interviews for both ETAs and the academic grants. And that's something, again, that OGFA or our office can help you with and to prepare. So we have plenty of sample questions that have literally been asked in previous interviews. And so again, we're here to help you with that. And then after that takes place, usually anywhere between March, April, and May, you find out if you receive it, and then you don't again start until about August. So like I said, it is a very long process. And something that we'll talk about a little bit later is what to do in the interim. And so whether for an English teaching assistantship or an academic applicant, I always advise my students, and this is no way glass half empty, but once we submit Fulbright, I encourage them to move on as if Fulbright is not an option. And that means apply to those graduate degree programs in the states that you're looking at or abroad. Apply to that internship or that other opportunity that you think would be a really great learning experience for you. Because if you hear back positive news from Fulbright in the spring, we can always make adjustments. Because some students that, for example, apply to graduate school, but then find out that they hear back from Fulbright, and Brian, who I talked about earlier in this presentation, is a prime example of that. Not only gained acceptance to Ohio State, was offered an on-campus assistantship that provided funding, and then find out they got Fulbright. In every instance that at least I've worked with since I've been working with this fellowship in 2015, every student has been allowed to defer to go and have their Fulbright experience and then be able to come back and enroll in their program. So that's why I think it's really important to, once your Fulbright process wraps up, be thinking about those other things that you would like to pursue, fellowship or otherwise. Now, let's see, last couple things. So how our offices can help, obviously, if you couldn't tell, there are a lot of different components to this application. And so your advisor is here to make sure that we're managing and checking in on all of those components and helping you as best we can and reaching out to whichever entities you need to reach out to make sure that you get the information or get the letters that you need. We're here to help when it comes to selecting who can best support your application. It's going to be different for the academics versus the ETAs. But the main work that we're going to do on a weekly basis is workshop your essays and help and make sure that you're fitting as much good content, authentic content into those essays as possible. And we're, of course, if you have specific in-country questions, we have contacts within Fulbright. We have plenty of alumni that we've been working with throughout the years, like some who may have applied to the countries that you're interested in, and we can put you in contact with them just to get more information about the in-country experience that I just may not be able to provide because I haven't done a Fulbright to Kenya or I haven't done a Fulbright to the United Kingdom. This is our contact information. So Dr. Stevenson, Dr. McCall, so if you're a graduate student, reach out to them and set up an appointment. If you're an undergraduate student, both myself, Dr. Filer, or Bonnie are here to help you. So please reach out to us and set up an appointment. And now I'm going to stop this screen share and see if Beatrice, oh, hello, Beatrice. How are you doing? So
Hi.
If anyone has any questions about Fulbright content, I'd be happy to quickly answer those, but also happy to transition to Beatrice for questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, I am almost about to graduate, and I would like to start the process and like learn more about the process. Or, well, no, I already learned more, but get involved in the process. Would this be something that even if you after graduation we would receive help from FSU? Or does it apply only for students that are still going on for fall?
That's a really great question. We work with plenty of alumni on a yearly basis. So for example, Brian, who I mentioned earlier, actually applied to Fulbright as a senior, didn't receive it. And then we worked on it during his the year after he graduated from Florida State. He was a part of a different fellowship program and just worked on a reapplication, and he was selected his second year. But even if you're an alumnus, I strongly encourage you to apply through, if you started at another graduate degree program at another university, then we don't want to step on anyone's toes. You need to go through their process. But if you're just an alumnus, apply through your undergraduate institution. There are so many more resources that you have access to that you wouldn't otherwise. For example, you can apply at large completely by yourself, but you don't get that CCE form from going through a university process. And like I said, when done well, that even though it's just one page, it can add so much depth to your application. So yes, please reach out to us and be happy to work with you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, Beatrice, let's jump into questions, because I know you have class, because like I said, Beatrice is currently a Fulbright scholar, so she actually has a lot to do right now. So thank you so much for joining us. I would love if you're able to just briefly introduce yourself and talk about what brought you to Fulbright initially.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Beatrice Dane, and I'm currently in Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK Fulbright program. I studied international affairs and anthropology at FSU, and I graduated last year. So I was applying my junior summer and then senior year. And what was your second question? Sorry, Jesse.
Oh yeah, just kind of what brought you to Fulbright initially? Like, how did you know this was an opportunity you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, so I had heard about the Fulbright program and was interested in applying, but just didn't have the time for it. And then when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, kind of all of my options for the summer were thrown off the table. So I suddenly had a lot of time to apply and invest in kind of submission. And I was also at that time kind of thinking about next steps for what I was going to do after my senior year. So I was considering graduate school, I was considering law school, and I was also considering just getting a job. So it seemed like a really good way to help me kind of think through what my options were, because I had applied for fellowships in the past and I found them really useful. I didn't receive any of them, but I found them really useful for understanding kind of what my goals were. It was a really good way to just like help me think through what I might be doing in the future, which I found really useful.
Yeah. I'm also glad that you mentioned, because we have a lot of students on a yearly basis that apply to opportunities that they don't receive. And we always encourage them that like non-selection is not indicative of quality. It's not because what you submitted wasn't great. It's just competition, you know. So then to go on to apply for a Fulbright and, you know, I'll brag for you, one of the most competitive countries, and receive that, I think it truly shows how what you bring to the table. Now, can you talk a little bit more about the specific Fulbright award that you applied to and why you chose that institution?
Yeah, sure. So with UK Fulbrights, oftentimes you just apply for the university for like a general, you can choose kind of what MA master's program you want or PhD program you want. For the one that I applied for, which is an MA in Global Security and Borders, that was the only option. So it was already decided for you through the application, which program you were applying for. And during my time at FSU, I had done a lot of work regarding kind of post-conflict areas and also with immigration. And so I was really interested in learning more about kind of borders and security from an immigration standpoint. And my program is located in Northern Ireland, like I mentioned before, in Belfast, which is a place it's a post-conflict society. So in the 60s, they experienced a lot of conflict, and also with Brexit, border issues have become a really big challenge here. So it seemed like a really interesting place to study global security and borders, because there's just so much practical experience here. And I was also drawn to the fact that this MA in particular, if you're studying, but also in the spring, so right now I'm doing an internship, there's an internship component attached to the MA, and I really liked that there was kind of like a practical experience part of it. Because sometimes when you're studying, it can feel, especially there's a lot of theory in UK universities, so it's nice to have something that's a little bit more solid and concrete to apply everything to.
Yeah, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the application process, what going through that was like any challenges that you faced, or just what you learned from the process?
Sure. So I think you were mentioning this earlier, but the application is long. It takes a really long time. So I spent most of the summer before the application was due, kind of writing my application, thinking through what I wanted to say. And during that summer, I had lots of people read multiple drafts. And I think it's always useful to have people who know you really well to read your drafts, because they can kind of say what might be missing. So they might know stories that you've told them that might be useful to include. And also people who don't know you as well, because it'll give a sense of, they'll first of all be more honest if it's good or not. And also it'll give you a good sense of kind of if your voice is there. So that's really useful. I submitted in October. There was a really long waiting period until I heard back, interviewed in late February, and then heard back in late April. So it was a really long process. I would say the waiting time was the worst, because you submit it and then it's out of your control. You just have to kind of sit and wait to hear back from someone. So that was really challenging. But like the ONF was really, really useful in kind of helping me think through my application. And in terms of advice, I would say reach out to someone who's in your program. So they can be in your interested program. So they can be either the Fulbright scholar or just someone who happens to be studying the particular MA or PhD program that you're interested in. So I reached out to someone through LinkedIn. They were super nice, gave me tons of advice. They even offered to read my application. So they can be a really useful resource and kind of give you details that you won't be able to find online, because some of the MA descriptions aren't that great. So that would be my advice as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think we can guarantee that the university will review your application, but I actually had a student a couple of years ago that was applying to Ireland and reached out to a faculty member that was, yes, send me your essays. Here are some resources. Here are some other scholarships you can apply for. So you never know what you're going to find. But yes, definitely, because we have students, like my background is in education, Dr. McCall, excuse me, I don't recall your disciplinary background. So we're happy to help in the ways that we can, but absolutely supplement that with someone who has the technical knowledge that you need.
And I recommend reaching out to students. So I reached out to faculty at my university and they didn't respond to me. So sometimes students can be a little bit more useful and have a little bit more time. Just don't be bummed out if no one responds to you from the faculty side. It happens to all of us.
That's another reason why we really strongly encourage that you get started early, because every year I'm going to have a student that applies to France that tries to reach out to faculty over the summer, and they are on vacation. They will not respond. But yes, so you kind of talked about that waiting period. Can you talk a little bit more about what else you pursued during that waiting period, or what were your other options that you were considering?
Yeah, so I'm probably not a good example of this because I didn't pursue many other options. So I applied for the Fulbright and was interested in graduate school, but I knew that if I didn't get the Fulbright, I was just going to go straight into a job. So in my senior spring, I was just interested in kind of looking at different job opportunities and kind of what jobs might be out there. So I didn't really apply for anything else, but that was kind of purposeful on my end because I knew that I wanted to get some real life experience as well.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what your experience has been like in this program and in Belfast?
Yeah, it's been really good. It rains a lot in the UK, especially in Belfast. So if you do end up going to the UK, definitely bring a raincoat. But the experience has been really great. UK schooling or UK universities are quite different from the US. So a lot of your assignments are due at the very end of the semester. So you don't really have any grades between the first 9 weeks of your program. And then at the very end, you have all of your assignments due at once. So that was quite an adjustment. There's also a little bit less support, I would say, from the faculty side of things. So you're very much in charge of your own path and to reaching out to faculty members specifically if you have any issues. So that's been a lesson learned. Also, the grading system is very different. So if you get an 80 on an assignment, you are you've won the Nobel Prize. You're the smartest person in the whole class. And you should be really happy if you get a 60 on an assignment. So that's also been an adjustment that people have told me to just not freak out if you get a 60. So So yeah, and in terms of like Northern Ireland, it's just a beautiful place. So Game of Thrones was filmed here. There's lots of cliffs. So it's just like beautiful scenery, and it's been great to get outside and explore a bit.
Yeah, and I know you have to get to class, so I just have one last question. Can you talk about what's next for you, or how do you hope to build on your Fulbright experience? And any last pieces of advice you might have for students that are interested in applying?
Yeah, so in terms of what's next, it kind of is what I was planning on doing if I didn't get the Fulbright. So I'm hoping to apply for jobs in the immigration sphere. I'm currently working at an internship with UK government's visas and immigration system, and I've learned a lot, and it's been really interesting. So I might be interested in looking at kind of working in US government, because the Fulbright program does have a way for you to get, I think it's called like non-preferential status. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but you don't need quite as much security clearance issues, I think. So that's something that I'm interested in, but I'm still figuring it out as well. So even if you do get the Fulbright, it doesn't mean that you have your life 100% figured out for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Beatrice, I think you might have just like 1 or 2 more minutes. If anybody else has a question for Beatrice, I'll still be here after to answer questions about Fulbright.
And in the meantime, too, if anyone wants to reach out to me personally, I know like large panels can be a little bit intimidating, but feel free to send me an email or try and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to talk to you more about my experience from the student perspective as well.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Beatrice. I know how busy you are, but we're really happy to have you here and to share your experience. And if you're trying to get in contact with Beatrice, if you don't reach out to her directly, I have her contact information, so feel free to reach out to me. I'll put you in contact. So thank you again.
Definitely. Thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you all today. I'll see you later.
See ya. So like I said, I'm happy to answer questions about Fulbright. We also have time. I know the Fulbright website can be very daunting to navigate, so I'd be happy to pull that up. Also, if you've gotten all the information you've needed and you are tired of hearing me talk, I am not offended if you would like to head out. Thank you so much for joining. But we'll hang out for a few more minutes, and like I said, I can pull up the website for those of you that may be interested in seeing that. Thanks for joining. Yeah.
Hello, I have a question.
Absolutely.
So I jumped in a little bit late, I think, just and I wanted to ask about the start of Fulbright. So does it start with finding an internship or opportunity on your own, and then coming to Fulbright saying this is what I'm thinking, and that's what you write your essays about, like this opportunity, how that would help you?
There are plenty of students that I've met with multiple times that don't quite have the specifics of what they're wanting to do just yet, and that's absolutely fine. I think a lot of it comes from speaking to faculty. Like I said previously, which you might have missed, a lot of students build upon what they've been studying at Florida State or some of the research they have done, and just adapting that project to the country that they're wanting to apply to. So it's not uncommon, because sometimes students will know exactly the country they need to apply to, and it has to be here. I don't care what I do. Other times students know this is the field that I need to be in. It's a little bit malleable as to where I could do it. And that's fine too. I don't think it's disingenuous to retroactively establish those reasons for why you need to be in the country that you applied to. I think the process is not linear. And so it just takes time to develop your ideas. And so it's just a long-winded way of saying that's what we're here to help you with.
Okay, perfect. Would you be the main contact for that help? Like I guess I'd have an idea of where I'd want to go, but like you said, I just don't have an exact idea of what opportunities would be there.
Yeah, so the Office of National Fellowships, which I am a part of, we work with undergraduate students or alumni, but Dr. McCall in the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards works with master's and PhD level students. So feel free to reach out to whichever office is most appropriate for you. I'm happy to serve at like a kind of that initial meeting, but we're all working collaboratively, and there'll be plenty of times where even during the Fulbright process, we encourage students to swap advisors for like a meeting or two just to get a new perspective. So it's really a team effort. So feel free to reach out or Dr. McCall or whomever would be best.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And let me double check the chat just to make sure there's no questions. Okay, cool. Any other questions? Or like I said, I'm happy to pull up the website. Okay. Well, and of course, feel free to unmute yourself or type into the chat as I'm going through this. So the easiest place to start, maybe not the easiest, I shouldn't say that. The most common place to start, I should say, is just the maps of all the countries that are eligible. Because sometimes, like I said, students will know very specific countries or regions that they need to be in, or on the other side of that, they'll know the very specific type of award they need to apply to, but they're pretty flexible on destination. So oftentimes it just starts, as simple as it sounds, by clicking around and just seeing like, how do these different Fulbrights exist in these different countries and areas? Like, for example, if you know, like, I want to apply to an academic program, there are so many different countries that have partnerships with universities and very specific degree programs offered. Just the more common one is the United Kingdom, because that's all they have. And so if you're just interested in just starting to learn about academic degree programs, kind of like Beatrice said, some of these universities have very specific, it is this institution and this degree. Whereas others, like the University of Lancaster, for example, it is, you find the degree. We have a partnership with this university, but it can be anything. So unless it specifically says like this Institute of Education at this award, it can be any degree that is offered, but it's up to you to make sure that this is the best location for me. This is why I need to be in this city, in this institution, in this country. But for example, oh, and this is going to be hard for me to see. I will do my best to find, oh, no, give me time on, give me time. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay. So for example, you'll find countries that will have very specific master's degrees offered either in very specific fields or very specific institutions. And there are new ones that are constantly being added. So make sure that you are looking around to not just find the most appropriate degree, but the most appropriate placement. But while I'm here, for example, there are countries that have just massive amounts of ETAs. I strongly encourage you, if that's the award that you're wanting to apply to, you don't just look at volume, because if it's not the best placement for you, it's going to be very hard to craft a compelling application. But some things to look at when you're clicking on these different opportunities. So obviously, first and foremost, you want to make sure that you're at the eligible degree level to apply to this country. You're going to hear, and sometimes countries will have more or less, just depending, but some are very extensive and tell you exactly, this is what this opportunity entails. You're going to be able to see the length, the duration, what they generally look for in applicants. Again, this could be very broad to very hyper specific. So unless they say, this is exactly what we're looking for, and if you're not part of that or part of that degree or discipline, then don't apply. If they're just giving you broad terms or just broad strokes, and you can fit yourself and your project within that box, then by all means, you should think about that opportunity if it's something that you would like to do. Now, for the ETAs specifically, it's much more common for them to just say, be flexible. You apply to this country, but we place you. We place you in either urban or rural areas. We'll place you with high school or middle school. So you need to be flexible. Sometimes, like countries like Taiwan, for example, they ask you to state preference. They want to know the age and the placement And so we want to make sure that we include that in your application. Another thing to be aware of is this supplementary project, like I've mentioned a few times. In a lot of countries, they do allow that, and that is where you can bring in your own skills, your own interests, your own talents, and really make this project your own. But when it's not permitted, it doesn't mean you can't engage in the community, obviously, when you're there, but it means in your application, in your essay, what we need to do is really lean into your in-classroom methods and your pedagogical ideas. And then from there, obviously, different countries are going to have different levels of specificity, the nature of the assignment, independent study, you know, what resources they have in country. And then they have some contacts that you can reach out to. Sometimes these U.S. Embassy, excuse me, sites will let you know what are some of the educational initiatives that are going on in this country. Like we have a current semifinalist to Uzbekistan that in her application, she looked at what the educational system in Uzbekistan, these are their priorities. They're wanting to not just emphasize English education, they're wanting to emphasize STEM education, and they're wanting to emphasize writing. They're wanting to, and so in her application and in her essay, she's like, this is how I will promote these initiatives that are prioritized by the country. And that definitely shows a review committee that you've done your homework. Now, let's take a look at, so that's kind of the ETAs a little bit. But say if we're looking at, you know, the Open Study Awards, the reason why I always pull up Brazil is because they do have a very good page and they're very detailed in what they're looking for. But so you'll see the language requirement. You're going to see, and this is a very important aspect to look at for any academic award. So you will see whether they allow, so in this case, Brazil does not allow graduate degree enrollment. You cannot earn a master's or cannot earn a PhD in this country with a Fulbright, but you can do research, independent research. And so some countries will have yes to both, meaning you have the option to do either. For the United Kingdom, for example, it is, we do not support independent research, but we do support graduate degree enrollment. If your degree incorporates research, that's fine, but it needs to be a degree program. So make sure that you pay attention to that aspect. But what I always recommend is whether it's ETA or academic, whatever your country is, you're going to keep this tab open, or you should keep this tab open from now until October 3rd. And I say that kind of facetiously, but also not really, because there's things that you may just gloss over, or just becoming so familiar with it, you need to go back through and remind yourself. So for example, a few years ago, I worked with an applicant that had a very specific poetry project that they were doing in Brazil. They had done some research and had written some poetry in years prior at Florida State. And their Fulbright project was, I can now recognize the mistakes that I made, and these are the ways in which I want to improve, but I need to be back in Brazil and in Sao Paulo specifically, because their poetry focused on the experience of Black Brazilians. They were juxtaposing with the experience of Black Americans in the South. And so I mean, to put it bluntly, the student told me, they're like, if I want to engage with Black people in Brazil, I need to engage in Sao Paulo, because that's where the culture is, that's where the museums are, that's where the art district is. And if you look in Brazil's page, they will say, oh, I might not find it specifically. So you will be at a competitive disadvantage if you apply to Sao Paulo, Salvador, or Rio de Janeiro. And so this student, we talked about it, and they were like, I could, but my project's good. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be as impactful. And so we were aware that you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage, but what we're going to do is we're going to provide all of that data. This is why I need to be here. This is where the communities are. This is how I need to engage. And if it's Fulbright's prerogative to not select you, that's their prerogative. That student was ultimately selected, but it's because they had to lean into, this is my project and this is how it would be hampered if I was anywhere else. And so again, to reiterate, go on this page for the country you ultimately settle on, read it very specifically and intimately, and sit with this for the next few months. We want to make sure that we address as many aspects of this in your application as possible. Now, that's just a little bit about exploring the different countries and regions. Another resource that I think is extremely valuable, so you can find YouTube videos and experiences and all these, and that's all well and good, but Fulbright also has their alumni page. So for example, they have this broad grantee directory. And so you can, I had a student a few years ago that was applying to a research project in Vietnam, and they were facing a lot of difficulties in getting in contact with the specific hospital that they wanted to work at, the specific university they were wanting to collaborate with. And so what we did is we went onto this page and they searched Vietnam, and they saw a few years ago that a student, I can't remember which institution, but a student had been nominated for a project in their field, just generally in their area. And so we were kind of like, well, you know, it might seem a little creepy on the front end, but just find their contact information and reach out to them. And so she did, and she was just like, hey, I hope this isn't weird. I saw that you did a Fulbright in Vietnam. I'm currently applying. Do you have any advice? And I have never, in the years that I've worked with Fulbright, encountered a Fulbright scholar or alumnus that has not been willing to help. And that person immediately responded and were like, yeah, here are my essay drafts. Here's all the contact information for all the people that I collaborated with while I was in country. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. So if you can't find anyone that has done what you're wanting to do or has studied in the country that you're applying to, this is the resource that you use. They also have, this is just a database, but they also have the alumni ambassadors. And so I would start here because it has very specific individuals with specific projects and listed contact information. And all of these people have volunteered to be like, yeah, post my information. I encourage people to reach out. I'm here as a resource. So go through this first. Odds are you will find someone that has either studied in the country or studied your subject, and reach out to them. But if you can't find them, use that grantee directory as a resource, because like I've said a couple times, Fulbright is a community project. The application is your idea, but it takes so much work from your faculty, from collaborators or peers, you know, the affiliates in country, that we're all here to help and help you get through that process, because it is rather arduous. You can also obviously go in and look at the very specific application components for your project. So if you're applying for a creative art Fulbright, okay. So if we go to application components, creative and performing arts, you'll be able to see, where is it? They have the supplementary materials. And so you can go based on your specific area, you'll be able to see exactly what do you need to submit in your portfolio. Also, very pragmatically, you can look at what's the literal prompt for the essay. I strongly encourage you to not get overwhelmed because, I mean, to be blunt, this isn't really a prompt as much as it is just a laundry list of things they would like to hear about in your application. And so that's, again, why you should meet with your advisor. We can help dumb this down to make it more digestible and just a little bit more approachable as you navigate the process. You're also going to see that the personal statement is almost like literally no prompt. It's just, who are you? And again, we're here to coach you through that. I will say selfishly, my one pet peeve every year is please, please, please look at the format. Look at this format for all of your essays. It's such a little thing, but when it gets to that review process, if you can't follow the rules, Fulbright's not going to look at your application. And so there have been students in the past that every week I tell them, this is single space, you're still at 1.15. Make sure that you're using the right font. Make sure that you have your heading appropriately. So just do that in the very beginning and never have to worry about it again. Now, I know I've been, which I often do, have been rambling for a long time. So I think we have one student left. We have a couple more in person. So please feel free to ask any questions. If this again is all that you need, feel free to head out, but I am here to answer them in the time that we have left. Don't worry, Miguel, I won't call you.
So like I'm also kind of in the same position that like someone else I'm or I'm graduating this semester.
Yeah.
But I think I'm gonna go to graduate school in the fall here at FSU.
Yeah.
So if I was to apply for Fulbright for like ETA or a research position, should I do it towards like the end of my master's?
So if you're pretty set on enrolling this fall, that would be before you would hear back from a decision from Fulbright. So unless it's a one-year master's, if it is a two-year program, I might recommend enrolling in your graduate degree. And then next year, we can talk about, okay, so how can we start planning for a Fulbright application, I believe so you're wanting to enroll in fall of 2023. So you would likely apply fall of 2024, which would be, I assume, the second year of your master's, to then start the year after, if I'm getting the dates right.
Okay, so if I start my master's this fall in 2022.
Okay, well, yes, then, yeah, I'm sorry, I was a year ahead. So you start fall 2022, and then you would graduate in spring of 2024. So then you would apply fall of 2023 to then start, hopefully, fall of 2024. So it's like I have to visualize it. It's hard to, but you essentially apply the year before you would hope to start, if that makes sense. So you would apply the beginning of your second year in your master's program, so you can hopefully start once your master's program concludes. And then, so in that case, you would really start having those conversations about your ideas, your project, the spring before you would apply. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So you said like applying in fall 2023?
Correct. Is when you, because then you would start the year out from that. So in fall of 2024. So essentially it's just thinking about timelines for when you should apply versus when you would like to start. And that can get complicated, but know that Fulbright is due every October. And so if you're applying October of 2023, that would be to start hopefully in fall of 2024. So think about it in that way. So if you're in the midst of a graduate degree program, you want to apply, like say, the fall of your second year of a two-year master's, or perhaps you want to apply in the third year of your PhD program before then you would start your dissertation phase. So you just want to make sure that you think about the logistics in that timeline. Any other questions or thoughts? So I think that puts us, well, a little bit over. Like I said, I ramble. So I have held you here for far too long. So thank you so much for joining. Feel free to reach out to myself or Dr. McCall, and we'll be happy to set up a one-on-one meeting. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. And we'll plan to go from there. But thank you all so much.
Thank you.